we don't know exactly where the orphan came from or how it got to Blue Spring. The first time I noticed it was probably in mid-December, and I just noticed that there was a manatee calf with a manatee mother who I knew that wasn't her biological calf, because her calf had some little marks on it, so I already knew that wasn't hers. But there were so many calves that, I thought, who knows, maybe it's just some random calf hanging out with another mother. Unfortunately, we then saw it hanging out with many different mothers and also trying to nurse from males, and it really seemed like it wasn't bonding with anyone in particular, which then got our attention, because that's usually a sign that that calf is orphaned. Now, oftentimes other manatee mothers will adopt orphaned calves, so that's really the best scenario when they take care of those calves and we don't have to interfere, because the calves, just do really well. Unfortunately, with this calf, its condition really declined over the weeks, which really got our attention. It was very thin, it was kind of lethargic, you could almost see like the ribs and kind of what we call a peanut head, which is just a kind of a indent behind the neck region. So that was just something that was really concerning to us and our partners. Yeah, so orphan calves can really be very opportunistic. Manatees in general, they're very resilient. So usually what we see with orphan calves is that they do try to latch on to different mothers. They may try to stick with one mother. If that mother isn't really in the mood to care, they may actually move on to another mother. So we see that a lot, just the calf kind of opportunistically hopping around and trying to nurse on different adults. And there's very few instances where the manatee calf just like sits there and gives up. They're really trying, but they're very small and they do need that milk from mom, especially during the winter months. They're having a really hard time because they're dealing with the cold weather. They're dealing with large aggregations of manatees, which can be a good thing. There's a lot of mothers out there. But as you see here, that little calf is kind of in the middle of an aggregation and it's just not in good body condition. So it's been trying for weeks to get enough nourishment. But I think a combination between not finding that and dealing with the cold water just eventually led to the point where it wasn't doing that well anymore. It was actually looked pretty good when I first saw it, so that wasn't really a reason for concern back then. But over the weeks, the condition really started to decline. Yeah, so we usually do a lot of observations on any manatees that we're concerned about, whether it's an orphan calf or boat strike or anything like that, because the last thing we want to do is put them through a stressful rescue and, remove them from their natural habitat when they might be able to heal or to survive on their own. We do want to give them that chance. So there are very rare opportunities where we say this animal needs to be rescued right now, here and there. It usually takes days, if not weeks, of really careful observation to see how that animal is doing. So with orphan calves, we usually look at behavior, like is it nursing? Is it nursing from the same mom? Is it, associating and sticking with one mom calf pair, or is it hopping around? A sign of trouble is when it's also hanging around with male manatees, trying to nurse from them, which really means it's desperate to find that nourishment, and obviously will unfortunately not get that from a male manatee that's not lactating. So we observe that very closely. We observe body condition. We try to document that, both using our GoPro cameras as well as the webcams. Some of the footage you saw earlier with the manatee swimming by, that was recorded with our webcam, which is amazing, that we have those tools. And then if we do see that a drastic decline in body condition, that's when we and our partners really decide to intervene and try to rescue that animal. Yeah, so usually what my role is at Blue Spring, since I know the animals pretty well, especially like for the orphan, for example, I knew which one it was. So obviously we have lots of calves there. I knew which one the orphan was. So I was asked to keep an eye on that orphan until the rescue crew could arrive, which is kind of easier said than done, because if you have hundreds of manatees in a spot and they're all moving around, it's really important that someone does keep eye contact with that animal. They can move around, they can swim around, so it would be very difficult for the rescue crew to determine which one they need to get. So I was basically keeping an eye on that manatee until the rescue crew got there and pointed out to them where it was. It actually took several net sets for us to capture that animal, so I was constantly moving around trying to relocate the orphan and getting it into the right spot, and then eventually they more or less took over. That's why you kind of see me hovering in the background, just standing by to see if they need some extra hands or anything to get the animal onto the boat. So that's pretty much my role at Blue Spring, keeping an eye on the manatee and reporting what I see to them. And then when they actually come out to rescue, it's mostly them doing all the muscle work to get the manatee onto the boat, and I help later on trying to get it into the truck. Yeah, it's definitely a process. So sometimes for small calves, we can use what we call a hoop net. So it's almost like a fishing net where you can kind of just hoop them with. So you can see that here on the boat, the lady and the two ladies in the front, they're actually holding like a big net that they're trying to hoop the calf from the boat. Sometimes that's successful. We've had successful rescues like that, but sometimes it's also really difficult. So for Churro and this orphan calf, we actually had to do what we call a net set. So there's a big net that's in the back of the boat there, and it has float lines on top. Those are the white kind of bobbing buoys that you see up there, and it has a lead line on the bottom. So we basically corral the manatee in that net. And then once the manatee's in the net, we pull the net up onto the boat with the manatee in it. That's obviously easier said than done. They are large animals. Sometimes we capture more than one animal in the net, so we have to make sure that we actually get the other ones that we accidentally caught out of the net in order to get the one that we need in the net. And then we will get it onto the boat. It's a specialized rescue boat that actually has the motor in the front and is open on the back. So that's how we can corral the manatee in the net, then pull the net onto the boat with the manatee, and then transport it over to a nearby boat ramp and get it into the rescue truck. So what's interesting about manatees compared to some other marine mammals, they do not crush under their own weight. So they can actually be on the boat or in a truck if they're placed on really thick foam mats, and they can survive out of the water for pretty much an indefinite time. Obviously, we try to keep them comfortable by spraying them down with water or covering them in a blanket if it's cold in the winter time, but it's kind of a neat adaptation that they do not crush under their own weight, so they're pretty easy to transport once you have them out of the water. So with orphans, they do have to reach a weight of at least 600 pounds. That sounds like a lot. Manatees are usually born at around 60 to 70 pounds. So they do have to reach that weight in order to be independent and be able to kind of fend for themselves out there. That's a guideline by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who is responsible for managing manatees. So that also gives them a little bit of a buffer. So they're a little bit bigger than they would need to be on their own. But oftentimes when you rehabilitate an orphan and you release them back out into the wild, they do take a couple of weeks to really get used to their habitat, to get used to how to feed, how to find that warm water, how to find the food. So you do want to give them a little bit of extra buffer. So even if they lose a bit of weight, they're not at the point where they could no longer sustain themselves. So you want to give them a little bit of that buffer. So it's usually a weight and a size requirement that they have to meet, and that's those 600 pounds. And once they have reached that release weight and they're cleared otherwise, obviously they get an exam by a vet, looking at blood work, looking at those blood values, all of that kind of stuff, making sure there's nothing else going on with their bodies like abscesses or so on and so forth. And then they will be ready to go back out into the wild.